All right, everybody. This week we will be talking about Jose Saramago's The Cave, translated by Margaret Jull Costa, which I'm probably mispronouncing again. Quite the interesting book insofar as how you approach it seems to sort of extend beyond the book itself, I think. And part of this ties into my reason for picking up the book, which is in part due to the... I saw a video on it, actually, when I was interested in Saramago. One of the videos that popped up when I searched his name was a promotional material for this particular book. And the way the promotional material described the book, as well as the way that the book describes itself, ends up being quite misleading as to the true nature of the book. But I will leave that for later. Suffice to say... it was nice to finally get around to reading this book that I think the premise was very, very interesting about. And if the actual contents of the book were different from how it was advertised, then so be it. But I see what he tried to do and appreciate it. So the premise as it is described on the back of the book, and as most places will describe it, is that there is this old Potter family. They live in a village on the outskirts of a giant mega complex that is called the Center. And the Potter drives in once every 10 days or so, drops off his goods at the Center, which this is like a huge shopping mall, but it has residential areas and casinos and all sorts of stuff. And comes back home with his son-in-law. And... But one day, the Center decides to stop buying his goods, and ultimately he is forced to move in with his son-in-law at the Center. And while there, he discovers in the Center the actual cave that is mentioned in the allegory of Plato's cave within the Center. So that's the brief overview of the book. That's why I picked up the book. To whom would I recommend this book to? That's kind of a hard one in the sense that it's not a very plot-driven book. If you're like me, you heard that description and you thought, like, oh, this is going to be like sort of this mystery type thing, which all the names absolutely was, and there might be this element of danger, this sort of fight against capitalism, and, the parallels between contemporary capitalism and Plato's cave are so on the nose that even just saying it, you already know or have drawn about a million conclusions on your own. And I think that in many ways Saramago himself knows this because, and this is where I'll kind of sort of slightly spoil things, but not really, because it's more the advertising that spoils every single turn of the book. The events that describe the book, his actual finding of the cave, don't actually happen until the last 20 pages of the book, which sounds tantamount to false advertising, and I could absolutely see people feeling tricked into that, especially considering what the rest of the story is itself very, very light on plot. If you are the type of person who reads books mostly for plot and for things to happen, then you are absolutely going to hate this book, even if you enjoy some of Saramago's other books, because the majority of the book is dedicated to the sort of plight of these people and their efforts to towards... Okay, so they lose their pottery business, but then they get a thing for figurines. They have an idea for figurines, and they try to sell those and everything, and a lot of the book is dedicated to the pursuit of this thing, which even just from the back of the book, it tells you is destined to fail. So it's a spoiler from the back of the book. It's a spoiler coming from me, but at the same time, like, I don't know. It's a spoiler coming from everybody because this is how the book has been marketed. I don't know if this was Saramago's intent or not, but certainly a lot of the book is focused on the craft of pottery, insofar as it serves, and I'm just going to touch on the sort of themes here, to be the contrast in terms of the individual craftsmen and what they go through versus what we as consumers kind of see in the store and buy in the store versus things that have been mass produced in a factory to be appealing. And a lot of the book is focused, very, very focused on the details of the pottery and how they come to work on this project, how it goes from sort of the planning phase to the conceptualization phase, materials, plotting, how to make it, whether to paint before or after. And there are certain little elements that go throughout the story, such as a relationship. The main character, Cipriano, is widowed, and there is a hint at a relationship with one of his neighbors. Then you have the relationship between him and his daughter, him and his son-in-law, the dog that they find, who they name Found. And I have to say, like, as a reader, I was mostly concerned about Found's future, knowing that dogs aren't allowed in the center. But again, like, all this stuff sort of hangs on the periphery. They're not really at the core of the story. At the core of the story is the creative process, not just the creative process in terms of, like, creating art, which that is part of it, the craftsmanship, but also the business side of being an independent salesman, of being somebody who works via your own labor, via selling things that you create, and having those things not only not be wanted anymore, but having your entire craft sort of rendered redundant by mass-produced goods, and cheaply mass-produced goods at that. So if you're the type of person who's gonna hear that and be okay with that, then definitely check it out. If you're the type of person who is like me, you heard that description and you're going into this expecting more of a type of, like I said, sort of thriller story, or not even thriller. Thriller is definitely the wrong word, but definitely more of a mystery. Then I would say that you should probably either avoid it, or if you're already familiar with Saramago's work, then maybe give it a shot. It's not where I would recommend anybody start with Saramago, but it's still enjoyable as somebody who enjoys Saramago, specifically because, and this kind of gets into the pros and cons, it's full of those little observations in Saramago's writings that make his work, I think, so sort of timeless and so popular. Like All the Names, and I believe Blindness and The Double as well, he writes as a narrator. So he's not in the story. He's very much speaking the story, telling the story, and will often reference the audience, will often reference the fact that it's a story, will sometimes reveal things ahead of time and bring them back reveal things ahead of time, and sort of things like that, elements like that. But he also drops it in doing this. He also sets himself up to drop all these sort of little nuggets, little hints of wisdom, little things that you can kind of cut out, clip. If you're very much a sort of mindfulness message of the day type person, then I could see very easily somebody making like a calendar of Saramago quotes where every day is a different Saramago quote. And it's in all of these little nuggets that I think that the book continues to sort of have more to it than necessarily just the clay-making process, because it really is about the importance of the process and the revelations and things that come from that process, and how that relates to the idea of the cave and the idea of being at sort of the center of everything, but at the same time disconnected from everything real. But that's getting into more thematic discussion, so I'll just leave that at plus, or as a plus, all these little moments. As a con, like I said, I understand what the book is trying to do. I appreciate what the book is trying to do. So it's difficult for me to list this as a con. I'll just list this as more of like, I prefer stories that have more going on in them. And I did find a lot of the descriptions of how to do the pottery and the planning and whatnot for this ultimately ill-fated endeavor to be the kind of thing that's fun to read once, but whereas I would happily go back and reread all the names or the double or something, The Cave, I feel, would be very difficult to reread. Not impossible, but more difficult to reread because so many of the details once known aren't necessarily interesting unto themselves because, again, it is more about the process. But in describing the process, it ends up taking so many pages, understandably, because it's so detailed, that I feel like it would be difficult to go back and reread all of those pages, especially knowing that it comes to not. So while it's not necessarily a con or going to be a con to most people, especially in light of the whole thing, I have to mention it, I feel like. Which, when it comes back to thinking about it in terms of the context of a pro, when I think about that original book and I think about the original concept that they could have gone with in terms of comparing the cave and having it be this kind of more mystery thing, on the one hand, I like that from a plot perspective, and I think that Saramago could have done something really interesting with that. But praise and credit has to be given, I think, to not going with that route, and instead going with the route that itself, like I said, makes the reading experience meant to be more like, I don't necessarily want to say the cave itself, but the reading experience is meant more to draw your attention to these elements and to take the aspect of the cave being underneath this big complex and center being such an obvious metaphor that even the way that it's handled in the book, when it does happen, the characters literally just say, "They are us." Like, there is no ambiguity, and I appreciate Saramago, for just coming out and saying that, because especially in the year 2025, where so many of the most popular books getting published today actually strive to be as blunt as possible because they want the marketing. And if you make a book and so few people read a book that they're only going to read one book a year, then you want to make a point, you want it to be a blunt point, and you want it to be a point that will be very easy to grasp, that way that the book sells. So to as a reader in 2025, reading this book now in such a way that it goes against the obvious, I have nothing but sort of praise for that, and for having the audacity to do that. Bravo. And it is a point worth bringing up and a point worth mentioning, and I think it's done very well, even if it necessarily makes it difficult to go back and reread it. And in terms of the cons, another con, I don't really have one. I think that's it. I mentioned back in my Colorlit Skuru Tozaki video that with shorter books, sometimes I find it more difficult to come up with cons and cons because usually shorter books have a more focused objective, and they set out to accomplish this, and they pull it off. And with this book, it's very much that it has that one con where, by not being what you expected and being what it is, it can turn some people off. But it set out with this goal, and it accomplished that goal, and it did it in a unique way that I think serves the themes very well. So in that sense, I'm just going to round off this section because I would just end up going in circles because it's just a short, focused book, and it accomplishes what it needs to and then ends very, very quickly and very abruptly. So moving into the themes, the interesting thing about the themes, I'm going to draw a comparison really quickly to a man here, in the sense that if you watch my man review, if you watch my review on A Man, then you'll remember that I had a hard time discussing the themes because if you just read the book was so blunt with its themes that discussing them felt like I was just parroting what the book had already said. The Cave, however, provides an interesting contrast where, again, the primary theme, the core theme, is so on the nose, the metaphor between Plato's Cave and contemporary consumerism, that it feels pointless to talk about. on its own. But again, this is where I have to applaud Saramago for being aware of this and crafting the book in this different way, because it really breaks the metaphor down on more levels than just equating a shopping mall to the cave that Plato lives in. It's also the way there's the elements of advertising to it, but the way that the city itself is laid out is itself a microcosm of Plato's analogy, in the sense that you have at its core the center itself, which is very much the cave, and the next ring out is the city around the center, and then the next ring out is the no man's land, and then the next ring out is the shanty town, the next ring out is the industrial area, the next ring out is the green belt, as it's called. We'll return to that. And then finally you start getting into the land. And what is pretty obvious is, with each layer removed from the center, things become more authentic and less artificial. But even then, even in like the quote unquote green belt, everything is grown in greenhouses. It's all artificial in much the way that much of our food production is done now, coming off of all over creation. That's definitely timely. So it even concludes with the mention that the strawberries were becoming less red, and that someday they'd be white and tasteless. And I certainly hear all the time people complaining, people who grew up on farms or who remember older agriculture, that we definitely have prettier looking food, but that it doesn't have anywhere half the taste. And having moved to a different country and having been around some farms and produce, I can certainly back that up. It may not look as appealing, but the taste is entirely different. And this is a reflection of that sort of superficiality that comes with a lot of modern consumerism. So again, it's not on the nose. It's not, no character comes out and says, and this is the green belt where everything is fake. And doesn't that make you think of something? It's left up for the reader to interpret. And you see this, like I said, reflected many kinds of caves on many different levels, on many different layers, sort of detached from reality or coming closer to reality. You see it with the family themselves and all their relationships, which relationships and progeny are kind of another key point of this, because you have the son, the son-in-law, right, whose name I will probably botch right now, Marcel, who works for the center and has a very bad relationship with his parents. But then you have Marta, Cipriano's daughter, and they have a fantastic relationship. And the sort of progeny, this sort of ties in. I'm getting into another theme, and I'm just going to go ahead and preface this by saying, like, the other big theme of this book is the effect that these big commercial enterprises have on smaller family-owned businesses. Because you have Cipriano, who is a third, fourth generation potter, and his daughter, if she wasn't primed to take over the craft, then at the very least, had things not changed, she would have kept the spirit alive and the technique in with herself, and it would have continued in that sense. So having the loss of livelihood is one thing, and it's certainly a huge thing, and it's certainly a huge deal. And to have the sort of loss of livelihood, these crafted, sculpted clay pottery replaced with cheap plastic products, not just plastic products, but plastic products designed to imitate the weight and feel of pottery. So again, tying back to the sort of metaphor of the cave, it's not just that it's cheap plastic, it's that it's cheap plastic specifically disguised to look like something else. And the fact that people prefer the cheap plastic that looks like something else to something handmade, which I could open a can of worms with the way generative language models, quote unquote AI, is used today, and go on that. But ultimately, the center, which might have seemed something comical when this was written, really is just like a giant Amazon facility nowadays. And a lot of the things that you see in that have been reflected very much in real life businesses. It was Walmart, I guess would have been even before Amazon. So, you had Walmarts come in and destroy local businesses. Now you have Amazons coming in and destroying local businesses. And AI is coming in and destroying a lot of business. And it's not just the fact that these people lose their livelihoods, but in many cases they lose generational technique, generational homes and lands and livelihoods. It's not just abandoning the craft that you worked at. It's abandoning the craft that your father worked at, that your grandfather worked at, that your great-grandfather worked at, the tools, the locations, that have this history seeped into them, and having to give it up because it seems that there's no place for you in the world anymore. Especially this is, again, this isn't in the book, but this is me applying my own experience and knowledge, as there really isn't much effort made to retrain, re-educate, or to help find people affected when this happens, new jobs, new situations, new ways of living. It kind of comes in, it's great in the sense that we as consumers get lower prices and easier access, but for all the people displaced by it, there's no safety net, there's no helping them. So, it's great that we get cheap goods and Jeff Bezos gets another yacht, but what about all the sort of bodies left along the way? And that is really what The Cave is a tribute to, more than it is a criticism of capitalism, which is certainly there, more than it is a criticism of the artificiality of it all, which is certainly there. It is very much focused on the human aspect and is a tribute and the story of all the people who are cast aside and left behind in this sort of pursuit of what is quote-unquote progress. And it may feel like progress for a lot of people, but a lot of people unnecessarily get left behind. A lot of good people, a lot of hardworking people, and not just the people themselves, but also the knowledge and the techniques also get left behind, and that's a tragedy. And I think for all its awkwardness, there is a melancholy. I say awkwardness for all it's awkward to me in the sense for it goes against what I was expecting, but for all the strangeness in The Cave, for not being what I thought it would be, the melancholy that hovers over this family, that hovers over everything, all their actions, the sort of futility of it all, is something that I personally deeply something that I deeply relate to, in the sense that there's a sort of futility in the face of the all-consuming capitalist icon, that if you don't conform to what it wants, then it will there's no place for you in the world. You either produce what it wants, or else you suffocate and surrender to its will. And that melancholy, that overhanging foreboding sense of doom, which granted at the end the characters do just up and leave even their previous village for a new life, so it's not like it ends on a downer note, but it does end with an uncertain future for the characters. So it's not like Saramago is saying, here's the big answer, or that even for his characters, well, it's as easy as just walking away from it all. They do walk away from it all ultimately, but it is into a future which is uncertain. And it's that level of reality and that level of awareness that I think Saramago captured so well, and which, like I said, that sense of foreboding that we only have so much control. The things that control our lives, the things that control what we buy, are not even in our control. And to that end, I think the cave is very special work and very different. And like I said, not the easiest thing to read, insofar as, again, most people, and myself included, are attracted by plot and characters and things happening, and it's really not that. It's slower. I mentioned this word in my City and Its Uncertain Walls review, so I'm sorry to mention it again, but it's more meditative, more reflective, and I really enjoyed it. So join me next time when I talk about